Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Henry, and this is Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is what I consider the guts of this course because we're going to learn how to prescribe exercise for ourselves. So that will be the thrust of this chapter. Now, you know already that being physically active helps a lot with our health, with our physical fitness, with our overall wellness in life. But what you may not realize, you probably do, is that one size does not fit all. So clearly your bodies are not the same as someone who is a lot older than you or a lot younger than you, but even all college students, they're not the same. And so we have different needs, we have different body types, we have different metabolism, and we have just different body builds. So every fitness program needs to be individualized. So we're going to have to learn how to um, prescribe exercise for yourself. So the first step is often to monitor your daily physical activity. So see how much you're getting. This is just kind of giving you a baseline, how much to start out with. And there are a lot of ways to do this. That you can use a stopwatch and just a daily log, and this is kind of a low-tech way of doing that, but just say how many minutes a day am I actually being active? How many minutes a day am I moving versus sitting? You can use some kind of an activity tracker like a pedometer or a Fitbit or something. We'll talk about those in a minute. Your smartphone has all kinds of apps on it. Run Tracker is one of them, but several that will track your activity every day. And then a pedometer is just kind of, again, a low-tech way of just counting steps. So those are all good ways to just get a baseline measurement of your daily physical activity. Now let's talk about some of those options. The accelerometer, that is like a Fitbit, and it measures gravity, it measures changes in movement, so it can measure how many steps you're taking, but it can also measure the elevation, like how many hills you climbed, how many sets of stairs you climbed. And so the activity tracker is a smartphone or some other brand of activity tracker. Also, your smartphone may have some accelerometer functions. Sometimes an iPod will have those also. Um, Other activity trackers, Fitbit features is that you can set it to vibrate if you've been sedentary for too long, and we'll talk in a few minutes about how sitting too long is just as bad as not getting enough steps or activity in a day. If we exercise a lot but then sit all the rest of the day, that is not good either. Some of them have sleep trackers on them, even heart rate monitors to see how hard you're working. And a lot of times the smartphone apps too, they're very customizable. They'll let you set goals, join, so you're kind of seeing your friends' progress. So there are a lot of advantages to a lot of those. You just have to find the one that works for you. Pedometers, like I said, very low count. They just count, very low tech. They just count the footsteps. Um, Both a Fitbit, an activity tracker, and a pedometer, if you're going really, really slow, they're not going to count them. Like if you're making up your bed or just getting ready for work in the morning, they may not count the steps very accurately. Look at this table here. This is what is recommended by the American College of Sports Medicine, by the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, by the National Institutes of Health. But what's recommended is for us to get 10,000 steps a day. That's just a general recommendation. That's not an exercise. That's just in total steps, period. And most Americans at this point are not considered sedentary, but they're the next category up. 5,000 to 74.99 steps a day is what most Americans are getting right now. So that kind of low active category. But that's a whole lot less than what's recommended at the 10,000 steps. So just an example, I mean, walking 3 miles will give you about 6,000 steps, and then you can get your other 4,000 easily just walking around and being somewhat active during the day. So it's not that hard to get 10,000 steps, but it's going to take some intentional planning to do so, to get that 10,000 a day, to get into the somewhat active to active category. Now, this physical activity pyramid is just a pyramid that shows us kind of how much we need of everything. And you see that base of the pyramid is just, that is moderate intensity, just what I call lifestyle activity. You know, I walk to work every day, so walking to where you're going, riding a bike. This shows dancing, playing golf, raking leaves, or playing racquetball, or badminton or some kind of low active, but it's moving. Raking leaves, walking your dog, anything that is just a daily life physical activity. And then the next level up is the cardiorespiratory endurance, and that is more formal exercise, and that's recommended to be 20 to 60 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week. And that is something that will elevate your heart rate and actually improve your fitness level. To some extent. We'll talk about that quite a bit later. Strength and flexibility exercises are 2 to 3 days a week. Very important. It just doesn't take quite as much of those to get the job done. So 2 to 3 days a week is sufficient for those. We'll talk about them too. And then there's the inactivity. There's the sitting at the desk, sitting on the couch watching TV, just sitting, period. And that's what we want the least of. And unfortunately, with Americans, that's what we get the most of many times. So let's talk about that cardiorespiratory endurance category first. For most of us, I would say this is the single most important component of fitness because it is your heart, and you cannot live without a healthy heart very long. So maybe for older people, the strength exercises become more important, but for most of us that are under 75, I would say cardiorespiratory endurance is the most important for our quality of life. Now, unfortunately, look and see how many meet the guidelines for aerobic physical activity every day. 50% of men and 42% of women. So really half or less of us are actually meeting these recommended amounts of activity. And unfortunately, 34% just don't have any leisure time activity. They're sitting, they're walking as much as they need to get home and get to their car, and that's it. So that's not very encouraging. I love this quote from Plato in 380 BC, so it's a long, long time ago. Lack of activity destroys the good condition of every human being, while movement and methodical physical exercise save it and preserve it. So he knew even all those years ago what we need to do to keep in good condition and to keep our bodies and our minds healthy. So aerobic exercise is the kind that improves our cardiorespiratory system capacity. And there are 4 factors that we're going to be looking at for aerobic exercise, and we have to consider all of these. And we call this the FIT principle, F-I-T-T, even though they're not in this order. Intensity, like how hard you're working. Mode, what type of exercise are you doing? Duration, how long are you doing it? And frequency, how often are you doing it? And so just to remember that more easily, the acronym FITT, frequency, intensity, time, and type are a good way to remember that. So if you have 2 or more cardiovascular disease risk factors, you are supposed to get a medical exam prior to physical activity. And you'll remember back from the previous chapters what those risk factors are: high blood pressure, high cholesterol, sedentary lifestyle, age, men over 45, women over 55, family history, smoking, and so on. So overweight is one also, a BMI over 30. So if you have more than two or more risk factors, you are considered at moderate risk and should get a medical exam prior to beginning vigorous activity. But anyone can begin moderate who is just healthy. A healthy person can begin moderate activity. Cardiorespiratory stimulation is that's just stimulating our cardiorespiratory system. That's making your heart work just a little bit harder than it wants to for a specific period of time. So if we work at, and we're going to talk about heart rate reserve in a minute, what that is. If we work at 30 to 90% of our heart rate reserve, then we are going to develop our cardiorespiratory system. Now that lower end of that spectrum, the 30 to 60% of heart rate reserve, that's going to make us healthier, but it's not going to really make us all that fit. So 30 to 60%, the lower end of that spectrum. If we do 60 to 90% of our heart rate reserve, if we're working at that level of intensity, we're going to get greater benefits. We're going to become more fit. And that should be the goal, especially for people that are in college and even people my age too. So how do we determine that exercise intensity? And you might want to pause the video here and just calculate your own numbers perhaps. But we start out with determining our maximal heart rate. Now you may know your maximal heart rate, what it really is, like from a treadmill test or something where you have really maxed out and exercise as hard as you can go. Most of us don't know that, so we have to estimate it. So we estimate our maximal heart rate by this equation. Max heart rate is estimated to be 207 minus 0.7 times your age in years. So take your age, if you're 20 or 19 or 18, and multiply that by 0.7, then subtract it from 207. So I gave you an example here of a 20-year-old whose maximum heart rate would be 193. So that's if you're working as hard as you possibly can, right before you just have to quit because you're exhausted, your heart rate would be 193. Then we calculate the heart rate reserve. Now that's the difference in your maximum heart rate, how high your heart rate could possibly go, and your resting heart rate. So we just say your maximum that we calculated here for this person is being 193 minus the resting heart rate. And let's say that this person has a resting heart rate of 70, and you can actually take that easily just by pressing on your carotid artery with 2 fingers and counting your heart rate for a minute. So this person in the example, 193 is their max heart rate. Their resting heart rate being 70, we subtract those two, and we get a heart rate reserve of 123. In other words, this is how much you have left over beyond, over and above resting. Then you figure out what type of training intensity you want. And like I said, it could be anywhere from 30 to 90%. So in this example, we're going to go with kind of a moderate intensity of 60% of the heart rate reserve. So we're going to take the heart rate reserve and multiply it by 0.60 and get a exercise intensity of 74 beats per minute. Then the final step is we're going to take that heart rate reserve, 74, and we're going to add back in at the end the resting heart rate. So the resting heart rate being 70, and that number we calculated for the intensity being 74, add those two together, and our target heart rate is 144. So you might want to do your range to see what your heart rate range is between 50 and 70% of your heart rate reserve, or 50 to 80%. And that would be your target heart rate range. So you might want to pause the video and calculate yours at this point. Okay, let's talk just a minute about moderate versus vigorous intensity exercise, because there has been a switch. In the 90s, people started talking about moderate intensity exercise being better. You can get the health benefits. You don't have to exercise quite as hard. You know, it is going to decrease your risk for cardiovascular disease and death. It's not going to make you really super fit, but it is going to help you be a little bit healthier. And that was in the 90s. But we've always known all along that the vigorous intensity programs, you know, if you move a little faster, you know, do some running, that's going to give us more improvement in our VO2 max, or our cardiorespiratory endurance. VO2 max, remember, is just the maximum amount of oxygen that your body can process in 1 minute. So a person with a high VO2 max is very, very fit aerobically. So we know that a vigorous program is going to give us a higher VO2 max, and it's going to give us even better improvements in our coronary heart disease risk factors. So that health improvement will happen even more at higher intensities. So in the last couple of years, that pendulum has started swinging back toward vigorous intensity exercise, where we're really seeing that recommended more often, which is good. I think that's a good thing. So how do we monitor our heart rate? Well, do it a lot of times at the beginning of your program just to see where you are and make sure you're in the proper zone. So, you know, you calculated your heart rate in beats per minute from your heart rate reserve, and say you're trying to aim for 144 beats a minute. You don't need to count it for a whole minute. When you count it for a whole minute, you have to stop so long that you're slowing your heart rate down. So you can count your pulse for 10 seconds, multiply it by 6, and see if you get that beats per minute pulse rate. Say you're aiming for 144. Now, I would take the first measurement about 5 minutes into your aerobic phase once you're warmed up good. And for For people who are very unconditioned, deconditioned, and for people who are older, I think aiming at that 50% level is just fine. But for you guys, 60%, 70%, 80% is where you're going to want to be. Maybe even 90% if you really want to do vigorous exercise. So I would start at 60% as the base level and see where your heart rate needs to be. Count it for 10 seconds, multiply it by 6 to get beats per minute. Now, once you have been monitoring your heart rate for a while, you don't have to do it as often because you kind of know how you feel at certain heart rates and say, well, I'm running this pace, my heart rate is in the zone. So that is not quite as necessary to do it so often, but still doing it periodically is a great idea. So that's intensity. Okay, let's talk about the mode of exercise or the type of exercise. Now, for one, it must be aerobic in nature. What does that mean? It has to make your heart work a little bit harder than it's accustomed to working. So I can wiggle my toes all day long and I'm doing muscular work, but I'm not doing cardio work. Why? Because it takes major muscle groups to make your heart beat harder. Your arms, your legs. Wiggling my fingers, wiggling my toes. I may get tired doing that after a while, but it's not going to make my heart beat faster. So something that'll increase the heart rate and really the breathing rate also. Beyond that, just whatever you want to do is great. Most people do better with a variety of activities instead of doing the same thing every time. Some people, my husband just runs all the time and that's what he wants to do. That's awesome. But most people need a little variety just to keep from getting burned out or bored. So whatever you enjoy doing and will stick with, that's what you should do, as long as it's in that heart rate zone. At the lower end of the cardiorespiratory zone, the 30 and 40 and 50%, you're going to get some health benefits, like I said before. But if you will do your heart rate reserve and calculate at the 60, 70, 80, 90%, the higher end of the cardiorespiratory zone, you're going to find some greater benefits there for your VO2 max and also just better fitness. Now let's talk about duration. So how long do we exercise? Well, it kind of depends on how hard you're exercising, clearly. So between 20 to 60 minutes is what's recommended. So if you're doing vigorous intensity exercise like running, then we say a minimum of 75 minutes per week will get the job done. So 25 minutes 3 times a week, that's great. If you're doing moderate intensity exercise like a fast walk or biking or something that's just maybe around the 50, 60, 70% of a heart rate reserve zone, that is moderate intensity exercise. Actually up to about 60% is moderate. You're going to need more like 150 minutes a week, twice as many minutes, because you're not working as hard. So it's a little bit of a trade-off there. You can get your workouts in a lot less time if you go faster, if you run faster and do more vigorous exercise. But for some people, they will stick with it better and enjoy it more if they're doing moderate. So the choice is up to you. So again, the duration of exercise at 90% intensity, you're running pretty hard, and so a 20 to 30 minute workout is really enough for one time. You're getting a lot. At 50% intensity, it might take more like 60 minutes. So you can see how you just need more time for a lower intensity. So if you are accumulating 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity, at least 10 minutes 3 times a day, that's kind of the minimum it takes to benefit the cardiorespiratory system. So say you're going out for a 10-minute walk, moderate walk, fast walk, 3 times a day. It's not quite as good as 30 minutes continually, but it still will benefit you. Say you're walking your dog 3 times a day. So that is kind of the minimum of what it takes to help you health-wise. So just to convert those to hours, 5 hours of moderate activity or 2.5 hours of vigorous activity per week. That's what we're going to see providing extra benefits over the just 30 minutes a day. So 2.5 hours vigorous or 5 hours moderate. Of course, that translates to our 75 minutes of vigorous or our 150 minutes of moderate. Novice and overweight exercisers says make sure you're conditioning and adding gradually. You know, you don't want to go out and start running in the heat 3 miles at a time when you're out of shape. So that curve is a little bit steep sometimes. So start gradually and just progress as you can, and condition, and maybe avoid the really hot temperatures and all until you get a little bit better conditioned. So again, on the duration of exercise, let's not forget our warm-up and cool-down, because the warm-up, just general exercise, it says here, at a lower intensity. So if you're going out for a fast walk, and I consider a fast walk about a 15-minute mile, you might not want to walk quite as fast for the first 5 minutes. So just a little bit slower at first. And then the cool down, walk a few minutes slowly at the end to cool your body down gradually. You never want to just go flop down on the couch as soon as you finish exercising. Why? Well, your heart doesn't like that. It quit beating hard too suddenly. And also the blood can kind of pool in your extremities and maybe cause muscle cramping or something too. So it's better to do a few minutes of cool down at the end till your body kind of gets back close to resting levels. And if you can do some stretching, relaxation after the cool down, that's even better. Stretching can be done anytime, and we're going to talk about stretching later, but stretching right after the cardio is good just because your body is really warmed up and you will be able to stretch well at that time. Okay, how about frequency of exercise? Well, as you might guess, this is going to be tied in also with the intensity. So 3 to 5 days a week is what is recommended by the American College of Sports Medicine. But how do we break that down? If you're doing vigorous intensity exercise, running, something very vigorous, 3 20 to 30 minute sessions is really enough. Non-consecutive days is better because it gives your body a little bit of a chance to recover between workouts. But 20 to 30 minute exercise sessions will do that trick. So you're going to get three days a week is enough because you're doing vigorous exercise. If you're doing moderate intensity exercise like fast walking, there are lots of other kinds. I just use fast walking and running as examples. 30 to 60 minutes is going to be more your range, and that should be more than 3 days a week, ideally. If you're doing light to moderate intensity for weight loss, and most people who are trying to lose weight cannot do real vigorous intensity exercise because they're just not conditioned enough to do it at that point, it's going to take more like 60 to 90 minutes for most days of the week. And what you will find out when you get to the weight management chapter is that for people who have lost a substantial amount of weight, it really takes about 60 to 90 minutes per day to keep that weight off. So less time if you're doing more vigorous, more time if you're doing less vigorous. That's kind of common sense, right? So just to talk just a little bit about the daily active lifestyle. If you spend most of your day sitting in class, or for a teacher or an office worker sitting in the office, that can really cancel out a lot of your benefits you're getting by exercising moderately or vigorously for a few minutes a day. So death rates are the highest, cardiovascular rates are the highest for those who spend most of their day sitting. So just if you have a sitting job, just figure out ways to build in walking, or just getting up once in a while of those days. Getting up and going to take something to a coworker instead of sending it by email, or telling someone something instead of emailing them. Just try to at least 10 minutes every hour be moving instead of sitting. And that is hard for some people to do just because of their job, but that is the recommendation, and that will keep you from getting those bad negative effects of sitting too much. Now we have this little acronym: activities to enhance daily non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And non-exercise activity thermogenesis is the acronym NEAT, N-E-A-T. And so just the ones I just mentioned, walking instead of driving if you're not going very far, parking a little further away from your classroom on campus, which many people have to do anyway, taking a short walk after each meal, if it's just around your building, walk a little bit faster than usual. So instead of strolling on campus, just walk a little bit faster. When you're taking a break, just move around instead of sitting, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Um, when you're watching TV, just get up and do something during the commercials, or do sit-ups or crunches, or just do stretch or do something to move while you're watching a movie or TV, especially at home. You might get funny looks if you do that in a theater, but if you're at home, you can do that easily. This says house cleaning chores, standing more. I have a standing desk, one that alters from standing to sitting, which is awesome because I can stand for a while when I've been sitting too long, and even do some office work. If you're talking on the phone, stand, just walking back and forth a little bit instead of sitting still. If you're reading, stand up every few minutes, go do something. Stability ball for a chair because it keeps the core muscles active instead of just letting you kind of relax in a chair. Have walking meetings. This is a great idea. When you have a 30-minute conversation with someone, let's go for a walk instead of just sitting in the office. So and walking to our coworkers' offices or places around campus. So lots of activities we can do that will enhance our lifestyle activity. Now we're going to talk just a minute about exercise volume. And exercise volume is, as it says here, a product of the frequency, intensity, and duration. And in exercise science courses, we go into a whole lot more detail about exercise volume. So for this course, though, we're going to keep it a little simpler, and we're going to suffice it to say that if you can expend 1,000 extra calories per week in exercise, or if you can take 10,000 steps or more per day, that's a pretty good volume. And those are pretty easy to quantify if you're wearing a Fitbit or a pedometer to know if you're getting 10,000 steps a day. You can easily look up, even in our textbook, and see how many calories various activities burn. A really good aerobic workout I consider to be about 300 calories. So doing that three to four times a week is going to give you your calories per week. So that's a good exercise volume. Again, we've kind of pounded this already, but for good fitness benefits, 75 minutes of that vigorous, it's going to be at least three non-consecutive days. If you're doing moderate activity instead, at least 30 minutes and at least 5 days a week. So that's where your best fitness benefits are going to occur. And that's probably enough for exercise volume for the purposes of this course. Now, another exercise principle is rate of progression. And I'm not going to go into this very deeply. You may pause the video and read this better if you want to. Doing our starting out with what we can do is important. What we can do, and we are pushing ourselves just a little bit, but we are not pushing ourselves beyond our limits. So 15 to 20 minutes is where some people need to start. And if you do more than that, you could get injured, you could get burned out. So start where you need to start. That is your baseline. And then maybe increase 5 minutes a week. When I first started running, I had been doing some other pretty vigorous cardio for years, but I had never been that much of a runner since high school track. So when I was probably 40, I started running. And I had to just stop with, I could only run like a mile to start out with at first. And, that would take me 10 minutes. And then I would walk a little, and then I would run a little more. And I try to increase the amount of running by about 5 minutes per week until I worked up to running 3 miles. So increasing the duration gradually, increasing the frequency gradually until you're at the place where you need to be. So don't be afraid to start out low and build up gradually. Okay, I'm back. I just took my advice and paused this recording and took a little walk. So hopefully my brain works better now. Um, that by the way, that is another side advantage to just getting up and moving around. Sometimes if you're studying, if you're working for long periods of time, just getting up and moving around for a few minutes just kind of gets that oxygen flowing to the brain, and it really helps us to think better. So now we're going to talk about muscular fitness or muscular strength and endurance. And these are the second and third components of physical fitness that you've already learned. The first one being cardiorespiratory endurance. So definitions here: capacity to exert force varies with the demands placed on the muscles. So our muscular strength is just really how much weight can you lift if you're just lifting weight one time. Muscular endurance is how long can you do muscular work without getting fatigued. So those are just more definitions. And we have to place demands on our muscles in order to increase either our muscular strength or our muscular endurance. And of course, strength training is probably the best or the easiest way to do that. Now we know that if we don't do anything to challenge our muscles, that our muscles atrophy. That means they just kind of wither. They wither away and they lose strength. And that sedentary living, or if anyone has ever had an injury where you had to have your leg in a cast or something, you know what it looks like. It just looks like a shriveled up little no muscle left limb when you get the cast off. That's just muscle atrophy, and it's from lack of activity. So whether it's voluntary because you're just choosing to lead a sedentary life, or whether it's forced on you by an injury, you know that muscles atrophy and they really lose strength quickly. They also lose strength as we age if we don't do something about that to exert that force. So muscular strength mostly dependent, it says here, on the amount and density of the muscle fibers. So you can make your muscle fibers larger by working out, by lifting weights. So now, why do we even care about muscle strength? I mean, you might say, I don't care if I'm a very muscular person. I don't really want to look that way. A certain amount of muscular fitness is very important for our health, just for the daily activities that we have to do every day. That's called functional capacity, just getting around, getting yourself dressed. And I said a while ago that older people, maybe this is even more important for them than cardiorespiratory endurance, because they get to where it's harder for them to get up out of the chair, to get out of a car, just to walk around, to get themselves dressed. And that is functional capacity. So just doing what we have to do. So for you guys, your functional capacity is being able to walk from class to class every day, to be able to walk up the stairs in the dorm, or that's your functional capacity. That's the things that you need to be able to do. And if you can't do those things well, it really makes your quality of life suffer. So our statistic here that's kind of scary is that 74% of American adults don't participate in any kind of muscular fitness activity. So that's pretty much 3/4. And that is a high number of people that are doing nothing to keep themselves fit muscle-wise. So these are a couple of principles we go by, and they're very easy principles, actually. The first one is the overload principle, and what that one says is that we have to decrease those demands on our muscles systematically and progressively. So overload means that you are making the muscle work a little harder than it is accustomed to working. So if you are used to lifting at 10 pounds, then if you lift 12, that is overloading the muscle. You are overloading your heart muscle. Your heart is a muscle in your body, just like your skeletal muscles. So by doing cardio activity, you're overloading your heart muscle and making it stronger. Well, when we work out with weights or ride a bike with our legs, we are working out our skeletal muscles, and we overload them, increasing that demand systematically and progressively. So when one workload gets to where it's not all that hard anymore, we increase it maybe 10% the next week, and we are overloaded once again. So overloading just means doing a little bit more than is comfortable. Specificity of training just means that you want to choose an activity that's specific to what you are trying to accomplish. So in other words, just for an example, If I am trying to improve my upper body strength, the strength in my shoulders and arms, then obviously I'm going to choose exercises that target those muscle groups. So that is just specificity of training. When you think about cardio, if I'm trying to train to run a marathon, I'm probably not going to train running sprints because that's training a different system. That's training the anaerobic system instead of the aerobic system. So that is another example of training specificity. So knowing what your goals are and choosing exercises that meet those goals, that is what specificity would be. Now, the mode of training when it comes to muscular strength is just the type of muscle contraction that we choose to use in our training. So isometric contractions are when there are muscle contractions happening but not really any movement taking place. And so an isometric contraction would be a plank. So you are holding a plank position and maybe you hold it for 30 seconds. And you're trying to hold it as still as you can and you're trying not to sway or sag or, try not your back sag down like a hammock, but that is isometric. You're trying to keep everything nice and tight and still. And that is an isometric contraction. Is it work? Yes, it is. Pause the video and try it and you'll see it's work. It's muscular work for sure, but it's not really dynamic or moving work. It is stationary work. So for the lower back, things like planks and things where we hold a boat position, where we hold our abdominals in a contracted position, those are very, very useful exercises for the back. Now, dynamic mode of training is when there's movement happening. Dynamic just means moving, or the joint angle is changing. So lots of things we can do without weights. We can do body weight exercises like dips, crunches, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, with our free weights, all kinds of exercises we can do with a dumbbell or a barbell, with our variable resistance machines that you have in the weight room. Those are dynamic because you are moving through a range of motion in your joints. Isokinetic machines are those that actually you can go the same speed throughout the whole range of motion. You can't accelerate against them. And those are real good for rehab, particularly. The phases that we have in any kind of a dynamic movement are first the concentric phase, the positive resistance. So just picture yourself doing a dumbbell curl, and going from the straight arm to the bent elbow up at the top of the range of motion, that is our concentric phase. And my biceps muscles have shortened and tightened while I'm doing that. The eccentric phase is the negative resistance, and that's when I'm lowering the weight down. I don't just let it drop like a rock in the lake. I control going down, and my biceps muscles are lengthening while I'm letting that weight down, and that is negative resistance, or the eccentric contraction. They are both very important. Both concentric and eccentric both have their own advantages, and both should be practiced. So people ask all the time, which is better, free weights or machines? It just doesn't matter so much. It's whichever one you'll do. It's how well your quality of movement, as it says here. It's what you enjoy the best, what you can do safely, because a lot of times free weights, if you don't have a spotter and you've got a great big old a bar full of weights, then they may not be safe for you. Sometimes machines are easier for beginners to start out with, but they can both give you a very, very good workout. So free weights machines, if you don't have any fancy exercise machines, you can get plenty good workout just using some free weights. Just in a couple of different weights, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 8 pounds maybe. And in the last few years, we've seen a lot more with resistance bands, resistance tubing, stability balls, and these are just kind of things that aid in our workouts. Stability balls are great for back exercises, for crunches, and they really work the core very well. Doing exercises with those. The resistance band ones, elastic bands, are great, especially if you're traveling and you're they'll fit in a suitcase. So you can get a pretty good workout in just using those also. So how about the intensity of a muscular strength workout? Like how much weight should you be lifting? Well, the recommendation, just rule of thumb, is 80% of our maximum capacity. Like if you were going to lift that weight one time, the heaviest you could possibly lift, take 80% of that. Well, sometimes that's a little bit hard to determine. So what I typically tell people is if you do 8 to 12 repetitions with that particular weight and you are pretty tired on the 12th one, that's a good weight for you to lift. If your muscle says I can't do very much more, when you get to number 12, you're fatigued, that is a good amount of weight for you to lift. And you're going to progress that just very gradually. So maybe you lift a pound or two more a couple of weeks later. So just add to that gradually. That is just progressive resistance. Now the number of sets is another question. For general fitness programs, what is recommended is 1 to 3 sets for each exercise. So if you do 12 repetitions, you would do 12, a little rest interval, do 12 again, a little rest interval, do 12 again, and that's 3 sets. One really good set does an awful lot of good. So if you don't have time for 2 to 3 sets, don't just ditch your whole program. Just go ahead and do 1 set, because 1 set has been shown by research to do quite a bit of good, especially if it's a good fatiguing set. Frequency of training for strength training is 2 to 3 times per week. So it doesn't take quite as much as cardio, where we wanted the 3 to 5 times per week. Now, if you take a look at this chart, you'll see, and this top line is going to be the general recommendation for our class, just for general fitness, 8 to 12 repetitions and the amount of weight that will fatigue you in 8 to 12 repetitions. 2 to 4 sets. You're going to rest a couple of minutes in between sets, and you're going to do that 2 to 3 days a week. So that is a very good general fitness recommendation or prescription. If you are more interested in muscular endurance and helping your muscles get to where they don't fatigue as easily, you might want to do a higher number of reps, which would necessarily mean a little bit lower amount of weight. So a little bit higher reps, lower amount of weight. Maybe a little bit less rest in between. You see here 1 to 2 minutes, because after all, you're trying to get your muscles where they're not getting fatigued as easily. So not letting them rest as long helps accomplish that goal. If you're really wanting to work on strength, where you can lift very heavy weights, lift fewer times, maybe 1 to 6 times, where the 6th one would really fatigue your muscle. That means you're lifting pretty heavy weights. So heavier weight, less repetitions, maybe more sets, and probably a little bit longer rest in between will be necessary. And then bodybuilding, as you can see, has a little bit different recommendation also. So those are just recommendations, and that top line is a really good one for most of us to go by. And in the back of your book, you'll see in Appendix A, you'll see exercises without weights and exercises with weights. So if you want to get started, just check those out, and I will not demonstrate those on the video. So these are just some guidelines, and these are in your textbook also, but involving all the major muscle groups. Some people want to just concentrate on only the biceps or only the abs, or they want to but the back is often neglected in exercise programs. So just think of all the major muscle groups. Try to hit all of those. Don't neglect the core. Don't lift weights alone, especially if you're using free weights. Warming up, doing proper lifting technique, using good body balance. If you're doing a whole workout, exercising the larger muscle groups before the smaller ones is always a good thing to do. Make sure you exercise opposing muscle groups. People want to work the biceps, but they neglect the triceps. They want to work the abs, but they neglect the back. So consider those opposing muscle groups. Breathing normally while you're lifting. Some people tend to want to hold their breath, so avoid that. Just breathe normally. Maybe inhale on exhale on lifting and inhale on lowering, or just whatever is a nice regular systematic breathing. Recover between sets. Just use common sense if you've got some kind of pain or something, of course, and a little stretching after each workout. may reduce the soreness associated with the working out. Do not neglect your core. Core strength training is very important. The core is our ab muscles, our hip muscles, and our spinal muscles. And if you can get a strong core, it just makes everything in life easier. It says performing those activities of daily living more easily. Sports performance is better, less low back pain, better balance, which is great because it's going to be less falls, and just better stability at whatever posture you're sitting, standing, or lying down at. So core strength training should always be a part of strength training. So last but not least, we're going to talk about flexibility. And that is just, flexibility is just range of motion in a joint or around a joint. And that's important because it does make our quality of living better. People that are very, very stiff just have more pain in their movements. They're going to have more low back pain. Sedentary living, lack of physical activity, really, really decreases flexibility. The less you move, the less you want to move, and the more it hurts to move. So anything that improves range of motion around your joints is a good flexibility exercise. So if you're going to do a good stretching program, that's going to include all the body parts, just like the Good Weight program does. You're going to do the range of motion. You have as big a range of motion as you can. So if you're doing flies or dumbbell flies on a bench, that's better than doing it flat on the floor, because if you're flat on the floor, your elbows are going to hit the floor and you can't go down any lower. If you're doing that on a bench, you can have a bigger range of motion. You can go a little bit lower. So increasing the range of motion for each exercise, it should always be a goal. And then we also look, of course, at mode and intensity and repetitions and frequency, just like we did at the other things. So here you see the recommendations for mode. Just slow, sustained stretching is the best kind for most people. It is a held stretch or a slowly moving stretch. Ballistic is more dynamic, and if you've got to stretch dynamically, at least don't make it a bouncing stretch, because the bouncing stretch is the dangerous kind. PNF stretching, as you can read about that in the textbook, is a really good kind that really does increase flexibility. You can do it by yourself. It's a little bit easier with a partner. The intensity of stretching exercises need to be just to the point of mild tension. It'd be just slightly uncomfortable, slight amount of discomfort, but not actual pain. If it's pain, you have stretched too far. And repetitions, 10 to 30 seconds for the held stretch, and repeating it 2 to 4 times. Frequency of stretching, 2 to 3 days a week is recommended, but really, it's hard to stretch too many days a week. You're not going to overdo by stretching every day. So that is totally appropriate to stretch every day. Now, some people ask, when should I stretch? Should I stretch before my workout or after? It really, truly doesn't matter. A 3 to 5 minute warm-up before you're walking and jogging and cycling, something people think stretching before their cardio makes the exercise feel better and easier. Maybe a little bit longer than that if you're doing something stop and go, like playing tennis. People used to say that stretching before exercise help prevent injuries, and research has not really shown that. It's very unclear if it really prevents injuries or not, or even when the best time to stretch is. After aerobic exercise is always a good time to stretch because your muscles are nice and warm and they will stretch more at that point. But sometimes stretching before gently makes the exercise feel a little bit better when you're doing it. So again, look at Appendix B for just some pictures of stretches, but stretching each major muscle group for at least one exercise, full range of motion, and a complete stretching workout. And this for the purposes of this class. Don't say I did a stretching workout, I stretched before I ran. It needs to be a good 15 minutes at least of stretching, because you're going to get every muscle group in your body and you're going to hold those stretches for at least 10 seconds. So that's a good stretching workout. It's going to be at least 15 minutes. Goals. we're not doing an activity in the book for this, but you are having that goal-setting activity when you plan your exercise program. What do I want to accomplish? And you'll make it a concrete goal, like I want to be able to run a 5K race by the end of the semester, or I want to be able to run a mile without stopping at the end of the semester. They need to be time sensitive, by this particular point, by Christmas or by spring break. I want to be able to do this, and they should be something you can measure. And we will be reevaluating at the end of the semester. I mean, you did your 1.5 mile run and your sit and reach and your muscular tests with the push-ups and sit-ups. And so we'll be retesting at the end to see how much progress we've made at the end of the semester. So I hope that you will enjoy your exercise program. And I know this chapter is a ton of information, but you can review it, of course, by coming through here again or by looking at the information in your textbook. So enjoy your exercise program and just keep it going.